left, right.
Well, this is a fun episode. I think you're going to like it. We are talking about off-the-grid living. So that means you're not looking at your standard electricity and plumbing, are you? And it looks like you may not also be accessing our podcast. But if you are accessing our podcast, consider subscribing and liking the episode and interacting in any way. We like the interaction. We like the comments. We like the suggestions. And we don't even mind so much when you argue with our perspective. So on that note, this is a fun one. I think you're really going to dig it. And we had a surprise guest. So we do a little awkward pause about 10 minutes in, but it's a fun guest and he brings great perspective. So see you guys on the other end. This is SipTalk. Grab a drink and enjoy.
Of course, it's good.
Cheers.
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 Damn, it feels good to be back. Welcome to Sip Talk, episode 191. My name is Justin DiGiulio, out of my basement in New Jersey, joined by James, the Bosnator Boswell, out of Charleston, South Carolina. James, how's it hanging?
Things are good down here. It's been super hot in Charleston the last 2 weeks. Might be coming up to New York in a week and a half though, so I don't know. Saw the weather last week and it was like 56 or something in New York on a day and it was 95 here. I'm not really sure I want that either though.
Well, it could be refreshing for you. A little winter vacation in July. It'd be nice to have you up here. We could do maybe a live in-person sip talk. I think that could be fun. We might end up drinking too much, but it might be worth a shot.
Usually happens.
I think it always happens when you come up here. I don't know if that's good or bad. Let me ask you tonight. What are you drinking?
I am drinking Milwaukee's Best Ice.
Ah, very nice. I see.
Yeah, cheaper than Busch Ice because it's the same price, but instead of a 12 pack, it's a 15 pack.
So I guess it's less money per beer. And
Yeah.
we established the alcohol content was higher or lower. I think we talked
Same
about
alcohol content, 5.9%.
Oh.
It's probably the cheapest beer you can buy. And you might be able to do better if you go to Costco and get their store brand beer, Kirkland.
Oh, Kirkland makes beer?
Yeah. There's a great. I'll send you a
Ah.
link. There's a guy who does a whole bunch of fake commercials for Kirkland Light.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm drinking.
Buy it at the same place where you buy your pants.
So look, I'm drinking some Dewar's on a nice spherical rock tonight. So I'm not going super classy, but I am going pretty heavy on the pour here.
Yeah.
Whoops. So look, we had a pretty cool topic today. We are talking about living off the grid. So I see Peter Smith here. He's joined us on YouTube Live. So if you guys are watching us live, we can read your comments if you're on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch. If you're on TikTok, we can't see your comments. So sorry about that. However, you guys are welcome to join us by checking the link in my Instagram bio, and you can jump on board. You can share your thoughts on living off the grid. In the meantime,
so living off the grid, I'm going to guess that most people that are living off the grid would not be potential viewers, probably because they aren't on the internet.
Well, that's a common misconception, as I think we both learned about off the grid living. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, although I think wouldn't you pretty much need to have like a satellite connection?
Well, you would have to have something that wouldn't be wired. I think is
Yeah.
which is, I mean, effectively still off the grid. What you think we should just dive into it? I mean, well, let me have a drink first because this is Sip Talk and it's nice to loosen up. I probably should have had a drink before we went live, but there's lots of wires to connect here because I am on the grid.
Yeah. Well, let me start off, or maybe, yeah, let me start off and say, would you ever be interested in living off the grid?
As a as a kid, I I really like the idea. Like it totally rocks. But this is like way before the connectivity we have right now through just general internet. Uh, this is like back when you had basic cable, and then some of your friends had like the full premium packages, but there was no internet. Dial up. This might have even been before dial up internet that I was really interested in, like living in a log cabin in the woods. Uh, and then, I probably actually, those log cabins were probably technically on the grid anyways
Mm-hmm.
because they had an electrical connection. Should I, should we get, let me get into defining off the grid. So most people are familiar with the idea of off the grid, and their basic understanding of it usually means that you are disconnected from electricity, right? They have a basic understanding that you are off some grid, and I imagine the first one that comes to mind would be electrical grid. Fair enough?
Yeah, and I think I think some people think that it means that you're disconnected from all utilities, and some people might think that it's just electricity, and it can be both.
Well, that's the thing is there is this. It's not the same to everybody, right? There's a bit of a spectrum of of what it means to be off the grid. Some other grids might include. So you have the electricity grid, but it may also include, and this is along the range of the spectrum, water, plumbing, sewer, natural gas, garbage service, and transportation lines. So
Yeah,
you
and because
am
when
I,
I think about it, like my parents' house has its own septic tank and well water, so like they don't have municipal water.
yeah, so to a degree, they are not as on the grid as a conventional suburban neighborhood
They're more
house.
off the grid than my house, but they do get power from utility company.
So let's talk about how that power works, because I think most commonly when someone says off the grid, they mean off the electrical power grid. And the electrical power grid works by burning most predominantly fossil fuels. So they burn this fuel, which boils water. That water creates steam, and the steam pressure turns turbines, and they interact with magnets, which spin in this turbine, and they create electricity. That's how electricity is created, spinning magnets around a coil. And that's done just like it works in your gasoline car engine. It spins this motor. Let's so the elect. Were you gonna say something there?
No, I'm looking up because depending on where you live in the country, how much power is made from kind of fossil fuels versus renewables varies widely. Like, for example, my state, we actually get the majority of our power from nuclear,
Oh,
which surprised me, but it's true.
I didn't realize that. So yeah, so like I said, most predominantly, and especially at the point in time that we're writing this article and doing this live podcast, it refers to electric, and electric is most predominantly pulled from burning fossil fuels. But there are many other ways that uh, different areas can generate electricity.
Yeah, so
Uh,
if I'm looking at, so in New Jersey, New Jersey gets a significant amount of its power from nuclear as well, actually.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, like probably about 40%.
Of New Jersey.
Yeah, it looks like it's probably about 50% fossil fuels, about 45% nuclear, and then only about like 5% or so renewable.
And that's for your electrical. So my house has uh, oil heat, so we get the oil delivered, and that bill fluctuates quite a bit based off of the uh, the fuel prices. But also, some houses burn natural gas, and then you are actually plugged into the supply of natural gas. So you have piping that runs to your house from the common supply in the street. So natural gas would be another grid.
Yeah,
But I want to talk about how the power, the electricity gets to your house. So there's a generation center or they're burning the fossil fuels, or it could be coming from a
Nuclear or
nuclear
hydroelectric. So like in
or
Oregon, it's almost
hydroelectric.
50% hydroelectric.
Well, that's that's because they have the terrain that they have the water flowing. But look, so the electricity comes from the generation plant in very high voltage along high voltage transmission lines. So it's likely you've seen some high voltage transmission lines. They're usually kind of cut out of the terrain. And these high voltage lines go to demand centers, and those demand centers distribute those via power lines to the end consumer. So those are the power lines you see in the
you've got
street.
the super high voltage lines for long distance transmission, and then basically it kind of webs out to substations that step down the voltage,
And then
and there's
those
like 3 or 4
substations.
steps before like the super high voltage lines before it actually gets to something that your house can handle.
Yes. I think I just heard our doorbell ring.
But yeah, that's what those substations are doing is they're stepping down the voltage from one line to the next with the idea of stepping it down enough that a house won't just like short out because it's over voltage.
We may need to take a break. There's somebody at my door, a stranger here. So I'm gonna have to take a break. I hope that's cool. We're gonna pause the stream and we will reboot shortly. Is that cool?
Okay.
All right, hang tight. All right, sounds good. So we're back live. Actually, we have a guest. He'll be here in a second. We had a nice visitor, so I'll introduce him as he comes down. He brought some snacks, fine culinary snacks here, and I believe he's going to join us for the conversation. That's very exciting.
Yeah.
When you live out in New Jersey, you don't get visitors like you do when you live in the city. So I'll have to introduce this friend of mine once he grabs a seat down here with me. In the meantime, let's get
right.
back into off the grid living.
Let me go on my spiel because I'm proud of
what's your
this one.
spiel? All right.
Like, why live off the grid? Do you hate modern society and want to get away from it all? Do you want a house built on a sustainable and ecologically helpful platform? Do you like pooping and seeing your breath at the same time? Are you sick of giving your money to large utility companies with poor track records of environmental stewardship and general corruption? Are you a registered sex offender who doesn't feel like knocking on every door of your new neighborhood to give a legally obligated speech detailing your legal status? Do you like chopping wood in knee-deep snow to fuel your wood stove because your solar panels don't work in a blizzard? Then living off the grid just might be for you.
I was reading this after you wrote it, and I was dying. I was literally dying laughing. But that you paint a really good picture of what it looks like to live off the grid.
Yeah, one of the things when I was doing research on this, that came up often was about like ecological sustainability, and there was a guy talking about having a wood stove and chopping wood to fuel it for cooking and whatever else he needed, and what I was thinking was like that's not actually more ecologically sustainable than using electric heat for your house, because burning wood's super inefficient and emits a ton of carbon. Now, because assuming you're going to be chopping down live trees, if you just if you're just scavenging dead wood, then it doesn't matter. But if you're chopping down live trees, then you're taking something that's storing carbon and then turning that into carbon dioxide in the air. So like for all their downfalls, power plants are still probably the most efficient way to generate and transmit power, just because they're big, so you get all these huge efficiency gains just because of economies of scale. So, who do we got?
All right, so got Chef Bruno. He came ringing the doorbell, knocking on the door. He's got some treats here. So I was saying before you came down is I'm used to here. Let's get you on the camera here. All right. So I'm used to having visitors, but now that I live in New Jersey, that's not a common thing. So we got Bruno on the line. So Bruno, I'm going to tell you what we're talking about today, and let me pour you a drink. So we are talking about, and James, you're going to have to give your spiel again because that was good, and it's worth repeating. We're talking about living off the grid. So living off the grid, you generally assume you live in a sustainable area with your own electrical source, right? You're off the electricity grid. But we just mentioned that being off the grid comes with there are other grids, right? You have sewer, you have natural gas, you have garbage collection. What else am I missing here?
Huh?
Natural gas, garbage collection, sewer, public
Um,
water. So there's a lot of uh, there's a lot of things that you wouldn't have access to when you're off the grid here. So James, you want to read your you
the
want to sell
spiel.
Bruno on living off the grid here?
Yeah. All right. I'll do it one more time since everyone's a fan of it. Do you hate modern society and want to get away from it all? Do you want a house built on an ecologically sustainable and self-sufficient platform? Are you sick of giving your money away to large utility companies with poor track records of environmental stewardship and general corruption? Do you like chopping wood in knee-deep snow to fuel your wood stove because your solar panels don't work in a blizzard? Do you like pooping and seeing your breath at the same time? Are you a registered sex offender who doesn't feel like knocking at every door of your new neighborhood to give a legally obligated speech detailing your history? Then living off the grid might just be for you.
I think you hit the majority of the reasons, minus pooping and seeing your breath at the same time, why one may want to live off the grid.
Well, I
Yeah.
think that the pooping and seeing your breath at the same time is just going to be a consequence of, like, when if the generator fails and it's wintertime, yeah, well, that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, or if you have an outhouse and
Yeah, you can leave a true steaming pile.
so so yeah, who is that for? Who's willing to endeavor all of these things? I think it's not just simply sex offenders alone that want to be living off the grid.
Well, I think anybody that has like a really strong independent streak and was also raised in an environment where they were kind of taught some of these skills as just part of their upbringing. Because as we're going to get into later, the amount of knowledge that you need if you want to truly like be 100% independent of the grid, and you're not even really going to a grocery store unless you really have to, and you're basically growing your own food or hunting your own food, and your house is 100% off the grid in terms of you're getting your own water, you're getting your own electricity, you're taking care of your own garbage, you're disposing of your own sewage, all that kind of stuff. That requires a lot of knowledge and skill that most people don't have.
Well, we were lucky enough to have. Well, you grew up more in the mountains than I did, but there's skills that you pick up. You lived out in the suburbs, pretty rural suburbs, right, Bruno?
Yeah, I mean, I actually I was born in a resort, but most of my summer I spent it with my grandmother. That they had a farm, so pretty much is and it was in a outside of a town. It was a little. At the time, there were those little fractions of a town, so to speak. They used to call it the way fractions. That there were 5, 6, or 10 families that they had a group of houses, and they had a oven where they used to bake the communal oven that they used to bake their breads and that kind of thing.
So we haven't actually talked about living off grid amongst others, but Bruno, little history on Bruno here is he's talking about growing up in rural Italy, and
They were actually off the grid at the time. I mean, I remember when they brought the running water, but then they had a stream where in the next.
So I can barely hear Bruno.
you got
Oh.
speak into the mic here. So
Well, my grandmother.
you move in. Move. You get your eye. This is your eye line. This is your eye line over here. We got it. We got to
My
really.
grandmother, my mother's side of the family, so to speak. They were from a very old town, about 40 or 50 miles from Rome, but they used to live outside the town. So there were those community of probably anywhere in between 5 and 10 families that they had dug wells for water. They had a communal oven to do the baking. they usually had 2 or 3 families that they did the backing all together, so that they were very efficient that way.
And was there electricity?
There was no electricity. No, at the time I don't think there was electricity. I mean, I don't remember. I was too young.
There's electricity in Rome.
Well, understandably, there was electricity in Rome. I mean, in that particular area, I remember when they brought the water. The water actually, it wasn't to every house. They just brought it, and then they made the fountains in the middle of those houses that people could go there and take the water to bring it into the house. And then from that, they attached their pipes with the meters and so on. But that took a little bit, it took a few years. So I was probably, I'm talking about the 60s right here, but that wasn't a city. That was outside of the city. It was probably 20 miles out of the city. That city was really rather large as a territory, as a landmass.
So Bruno grew up that way. So I think somebody who grew up that way, who's not used to the creature comforts that we have now, it's probably easier for someone like Bruno to make that move.
It is easier today. I think that it is easier today to be off the grid than there was before. I mean, I remember them, again, my grandmother and grandfather, that they used to make their own cheeses. They used to make, example, wintertime, it wasn't necessarily for working. All the wood was already stacked for the winter. The only thing they used to do, they used to butcher animals, because wintertime they didn't need refrigeration. So they used to butcher them up and then hang it for 3 or 4 days or whatever time you asked for the animals to get ready to be chunked up in pieces. And then they used to make those, the prosciutto, the salamis, those kind of things that then were used for summertime where they were busy. So looking back at their life, I think that there was not much garbage. All the plastic, all the packaging, they were not there.
It didn't exist yet.
Didn't exist. I mean, if you did buy a can of tomatoes, that can, you did put, I don't know, nails inside, the buttons or something. You did reuse it. Everything was reused. All the food scraps and things like that was for the pig. I mean, I don't remember they did. It was really a self-sustained ecosystem in a way.
Yeah, but which is wild that's how things just were back then, especially in Italy. James, can you share a little bit more about some of the reasons why? So basically, your next paragraph in the article, if you want to share a little bit of that, some of the reasons why people today might, and remember, you got the philosophy background. So,
well, I think that there's a lot of people today, and that just look at modern society and say, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. And I think even someone who, like myself, who wouldn't consider living off the grid, there are times where it sounds appealing. Like, you just say, I don't want to have to deal with this anymore. I don't want to, I want to just, why can't it just be me and not have to deal with anybody else?
I considered living off the grid many times, and honestly, I think it's easier. It's easier than anyone can imagine in a way. Today, if you want the internet, you just hook up to a satellite. You don't need to go to I don't know, to whatever company you buy the internet for. Same thing with the phone. I mean, once that you have internet, you have communication anyway.
But depending on where you're living, if you're living off the grid far away from cell phone towers, you're not going to have a phone.
Well, you do. You have satellites. I mean, it's a different system, but you do have satellites communication anyway. And then you have. It's so much easier to generate electricity today that you can pretty much put a spinner outside, and I think you generate enough electricity to.
Yeah, solar panels plus batteries works out to be pretty good. It's just that, especially like a large battery storage system, can be pretty expensive.
So talk a little bit about the trade-offs, because I know you had written a little on the trade-offs of. Well, I'll let you touch on that.
When I thought about this, like the trade-off of on the grid versus off the grid is some form of both reliability and convenience. Because on the grid, everything is kind of provided to you, so it's convenient and it's generally reliable. Like, how often do you lose power?
our power. So I heard in New Jersey the power goes off pretty frequently. Our power blipped off for less than 2 minutes once since we've been out here in New Jersey, and it was like maybe a month ago, and we were like, "Fuck! Like, what are we gonna do?" And then it came right back on. So
Yeah, so I've lost power a couple times here, but in like the year that I've lived here, maybe 3 or 4 times, and each time it was because of a pretty strong storm.
which I think that with this climate change and the severity of storms, I think there's a good chance that it may start to happen more often. But what you're saying is if you are off the grid, your source of power may not be quite as reliable as the source of power we have coming through power lines. And you mentioned
Well, if you've
being
got
in a
solar
blizzard.
panels, like they are somewhat reliable provided the sun is shining. So if you have a bad stretch of weather where it's not very sunny, then you're not going to get much electricity, and you can only go as far as your storage carries. In the winter time, you get less hours of sun just by definition. So you're going to have less time to get that power. And if you've got alternative forms of generation, well, like wind power kind of is the same thing. And the other thing is if you ever have a storm come through, so like last week I had a big storm come through and knocked out my power for the night. And when I woke up the next morning, the power was back on. I didn't have to do anything. And if I was living
Mhm.
off the grid and my power goes out, well, now I need to go out into the backyard and figure out what went wrong. I'm the own like utility company lineman figuring out why power went out.
But
Um,
yeah, but that's also unique for us. I think 25, 30 years ago, power outages probably a lot more common. Especially,
they might
well,
have been, but you
we
still had
grew
the
up with a lot
utility
more power
company
outages.
paying for the people going to fix the lines. At no point did you ever have to like walk down the telephone poles and find where the line went down and put on your rubber gloves and figure out how to connect it back up again or replace a transformer. Like
True.
so you've got the convenience of if something goes wrong, part of your electricity bill goes towards paying the people that fix it.
So let's talk about some costs real quick, because I think that it needs to be mentioned because living off the grid doesn't mean escaping all costs. And of course, we talked before you arrived, Bruno. We talked about there being a spectrum of living off the grid. So you can live off the grid electricity alone, but you can still have other other things that are tying you, but you're still occupying land, and land is taxed by localities, and that's based off your assessed land value, county and state taxes, and for any services that are available, whether or not you are using them or not. Um, so, for example, you may pay school taxes if you don't have any kids. All right, so you're
I'm
paying.
paying school taxes right now. Don't have kids. If I lived
Plus,
off the grid, I would still have to pay those school taxes.
so, in addition to the cost of the land and the taxes, there's the cost of the setup, the cost of the building, and then any resources that you use.
Actually, excuse me one second. Actually, if you are out of the grid within a municipality, I think like here in New Jersey or Connecticut, I was in Connecticut when I was considering those things, you're still subject to certain they still check you out. They still check out the water. You are required to actually test your water source at least once a year, making sure that it doesn't have any contaminants or any impurity and so on.
And I assume that's probably a Connecticut law.
No, that's I think
Right.
that's everywhere. Actually,
Is it federal
it's
law?
a health. Yeah, I
I
don't know
don't
if
think
it's
it's a federal
federal.
law.
I don't think it's federal. I think that probably there must be a federal, but then it's the state that implemented because the state you need to send the inspector first. So you definitely required to check out your water source if you have a well. For electricity, I'm sure if you do put a windmill or a wind generator or solar panel, most likely no. But then again, you do need to have those transformer that you bring the electricity in and then the transformer and store it. in a certain way. So there must be some kind of, most like a fire marshal or a building inspector that they will check out those things. I don't know how regularly, but at least once.
Well, yeah, the cities and the counties, they make money by
That's how,
inspecting
yeah,
these
that's
things
pretty
and
much it.
and charging for permits. So if you're building a setup, you got to get the permits. They're going to come out. They're going to inspect.
They're gonna stamp it, and then most likely
Yeah,
they
so I guess if you want to do extreme off the grid, then you'd have to probably like find a really remote area and
the other
probably
side of
just
Montana.
probably build something on land that you don't even really own and hope that nobody notices.
Well, yeah, we didn't even talk about that in the article, building on somebody else's land in a kind of discrete area. But let me just talk real quick about some of the costs in terms of power. So you got electricity, and if you're foregoing public utilities, you can get solar panels, which is vastly the most popular and most efficient. You can do wind turbines. You can also do hydroelectric, so water powered electric. If you buy a regular and reliable creek or river, and then of course you're gonna want to store it because there's only so much reliability. You know, when it comes to power from solar, you don't have any solar power during the night.
Need to get those three together. That's
Yeah.
Yeah, and even if you've got like a gas-powered generator or something, that's just kind of an emergency backup. It's not something that you want to be relying on.
Well, the gas cost to run the generator is very expensive. Um, but that would generally be used as a backup. But it also they all come at cost. Solar panels can cost 15 to 20 to 30 grand depending on your electricity use. So presumably you're off the grid, it'll be on the lower end of that. But gas powered generators, minimum, 500 $1,000 for a very basic one that's not going to give you a house.
It's not going to power a whole home.
It's not going to
even
power a whole
close.
house. Yeah. And for some people, the upfront cost could be prohibitive. Getting the structure, retrofitting it with electric, solar power.
And you're going to have a really hard time getting financing for this because banks aren't going to be very interested in financing an off-the-grid property.
Well, because it doesn't have much resale value, and that's where the banks gauge the value and basically are underwriting your home. So on top of the upfront cost of the structure and putting in your own utilities, the well, the electric, you also have regular costs that can accrue over time. So as you mentioned earlier, when it comes to chopping wood, you need heat in the wintertime, right? And heat, depending on the climate that you're in, heat can be very expensive. So whether you're chopping the wood or you're buying the pellets, whatever that may be, or maybe it's electric heat, which I don't think is sustainable with solar panels. These things can cost quite a bit. Plus, depending on how off the grid you want to be, whether you're paying healthcare and insurance costs or not, those, if you have a health emergency and you got to pay $80,000 to be helicoptered out, or you're not paying health insurance because you really want to be fully self-sustaining, there are other costs that can ebb and flow. Tsunami style waves, like
well, and also just like the cost of maintaining all your stuff. You're like, since you're the utility company, you're the one who's having to pay to repair all this stuff, and like a lot of this stuff will break pretty frequently.
Well, yeah, but plus over time, these things can effectively go obsolete.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to be able to deal with not just maintaining it but replacing it, because there's
like your battery
real
storage system only
depreciation.
has so many power cycles before it's just toast.
And then also you may need a vehicle to get back on the grid. You may need to go grocery shopping. You might need to, maybe your kids go to school, but the house itself is off the grid. Again, we're talking the spectrum of the grid. So you may need a vehicle that may be something that needs to be registered and you have to pay insurance for. So living off the grid doesn't mean you can just retire and live in the woods. In some cases, it may mean that, but there are costs when it comes to that.
Well, and the farther out there you go, like the more you're giving up. Like,
Well,
sure,
Raj,
you're getting all this independence. Like Raj says, kids will be homeschooled, which I could
They
totally
could be.
see happening.
That is an option, yeah.
But like, yeah, the more independent you are, the more you're giving up of the things that society makes easy for us. And some people might like that, but like there's some things that are really, really hard for you to provide on your own and really, really easy for society to provide to you.
Well, a big attractor for many people, on top of the lifestyle of being self-sufficient, is the cost-reducing factor of growing your own food supply. Food costs, Bruno knows this firsthand. Working in the restaurant industry and being a chef, food cost. You're always talking to me about food costs for restaurants, and you're talking to me about grocery shopping. Bruno is always telling me about what are the most expensive items in the grocery store, like buying those pre-cut onions. You might as well buy 6 onions, for you're getting one pre-cut onion. But growing and managing your own food supply is a major cost savings.
1 second. I think that
Got to get closer to the mic.
You lean in a little bit. You hit the mic.
Okay. Going off the grid is more a philosophy type thing. It's more a state of mind than savings and so on. I don't think somebody goes out the grid because he wants to save on electricity, so to speak, or because he likes to chop wood. It's really a whole mindset. Let's put it this way. I mean, understandably, the services that we get, they make a lot of money out of providing us with the electricity and the gas and so on and so forth. So we are getting used to those systems and to the system we're living in today because the company, the corporation made it easy for us because they make a lot of money out of it. So I don't think that it's even a matter of an economic matter. I think it's more of a mindset. If you like to go off the grid, you do, but I think it's definitely very difficult today to do so. Although it become easier in the last, I want to say, 20 years
because of the technological advances.
because the technological advances.
So let me ask this: do you think it's more stick it to the man, like screw you guys, you're charging all this stuff, or you think it's more, I want to be closer to the environment and closer to nature?
I think it's more a matter of being self-reliant. It's one of the things that we always want to be.
But not everybody.
No,
you and I may share that in common. James as well.
Less so than the two of you.
We want to be able to retire. Why people talk about retirement? Because once that you retire, you don't need to deal with anybody anymore. You do what you want, when you want, how you want, and so on and so forth. So that's that's the carrots that they keep showing it to you for 20, 30 years of your life. At least it used to be that way. So, okay, you work for me.
Now it's 40 years of your life.
Excuse me?
He said
now it's 40 years of your life or 50 years of your life.
Yeah, no, now it doesn't even exist anymore. It's just the carrots in a screen. the carrots is not even there.
Yeah, there's a lot less carrot and a lot more stick.
Yeah, it's a lot more stick than the carrots, of course.
So, but look, the point that I was making is that living off grid doesn't mean you're getting away scot free when it comes to costs. There's still a lot of costs, schooling costs. It's not scot free. So, although I think kind of in general, the idea is it's going to be cheaper than living. Once you get set up, your operating costs, your residual costs are going to be lower than somebody who's paying for water and natural gas being delivered to the house. Anything you want to add before we get into how to transition off the grid?
I think we've already kind of talked about transitioning off the grid a little bit, but no. Well, I'm going to save the van life conversation for the very end.
Well, I think that's actually a pretty cool one. I didn't even think about this van life idea until you brought it up this afternoon after we painstakingly put all this information together. So we get about 20 minutes left or so. Let me run through transitioning off the grid pretty quick, and then we can talk about the self-sustainability of van life.
About living in a van down by the river.
As long as you have that hydroelectric supply. So if you're going to decide to move off the grid, there's a serious level of commitment. And your goal is to get free in one respect or another. But the first step isn't taking action. It's really this mental consideration if this is something you really want to commit to, right? You just can't dive into it, because what happens if you dive into it, you're going to regret it because you weren't fully prepared. So that's why we got this episode of the podcast, because this is what you're going to do. You're going to listen to this episode of SipTalk. You're going to have a drink, and then you're going to sell your house, and just going to give away your house or move out into a tent in the woods, and you'll build up from there. So once you decided to move off the grid, step one is finding a good piece of land. That's a major priority. Well, that's let's put that in line with that's after my transition. Right now, I'm talking about living on real property, on actual terrain. So you got to find a good place to land. Accessibility has its pros and cons, because if you want something that's not too accessible, it is, you have more privacy, but reconnecting with humanity when you need it, and you may need it, especially for medical reasons, is much more difficult. So there are pros and cons with limited accessibility. But the land also needs to be ample in resources, and the location needs to be in a climate that you are prepared to undertake. I don't know if you've seen the movie Into the Wild. You ever seen the movie Into the Wild?
Well, that was someone who had no idea what they were doing.
Well, he had a book, and he went to live in a broken down bus in the mountains.
Oh yeah, the one in the
Not just the middle, the mountains, in the like the desolate wildlands of Alaska.
And that's
So
what
not an
Bernard just
easy,
said. Yeah.
not an easy climate to live in, and he had virtually no survival skills.
Well, he had a book, but that's why I said the first step is really mental and consideration before you get started, because you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. And in addition, sorry, and I just want to talk about the land location. You can choose a piece of land, but that land cannot be surrounded by other pieces of private land that you don't have an easement or a way to pass by those other pieces of land. So that's I read a couple of articles where they mentioned this, that they were unable to. They bought this land, but then they couldn't access it because none of the properties around them would provide easement to get into the land. And because that land had sat there for more than 10 years without any easement, I think you have to have an easement for 10 years before it becomes kind of a implied agreement that you have access to that land. So once you've identified the location, you have to either choose to build a structure or maybe buy a prefab structure. So the land may actually come with a home on the land, and then you may need to retrofit it for solar panels by digging a well. But you have kind of three options, yeah. And remember, cost is a major factor. And I noticed that online there seems to be a small sector of the internet that's completely devoted to these kind of prefab, off the grid homes, which I thought was a bit ironic, because you have a sector of the internet that's devoted to living off the grid.
Well, those are the people that probably haven't lived off the grid yet.
Well, they're making lots of money, so they may not be incentivized to, and they're obviously using an internet connection and electricity. So who knows? But look, once the structure is built, or while you're building it, you got to decide how you're going to get power and water, because not everybody off the grid uses electricity. Not everybody's connected to solar power. Some use candles and fire to cook food and provide light, but water is the source of life, H2O. So you want to have, you definitely need the water. Yeah. You need to have a supply of water, whether it's from a stream or from collecting rainwater. But again, if you live in an area, and we're seeing this across the nation, the Midwest right now, California, it's not new to California, where you don't have a regular amount of rain, right? So you couldn't count on rainwater. Other places, maybe you could, but
Well, even in like before climate change made California even more arid than it is now, like there's certain parts of the country that are very seasonal with their weather, where like there will be parts of California that'll go 6 or 7 months with no rain, and then they'll get all their rain for the year in like 3 or 4 months. So they might get like a normal amount of rain, but it's compressed into like 3 or 4 months, and then like that fills up a whole bunch. Like in California, like in Sacramento, where my brother lived, like it wouldn't rain for 8 months, and then it would rain a lot in like 3 or 4 months, and all that rain would fill up like the snowpack in the Sierra Nevadas, and then like over the rest of the year, that snowpack
Snowpack,
would melt down
exactly.
and feed the rivers.
Yeah. So the point is that there's a lot of planning, and that planning is also location specific.
One thing I want to mention is in some parts, all the old houses, the basement is it's actually a cistern because it rained very little. There is no water source in the island. So everything that rained, all the rain, it was collected in the basement of the house. Each house has this basement full of that is a cistern.
So it's fun. So what Bruno's saying is the basements of the homes in St. Barnes are a cistern, which I don't know exactly the mechanics of how that works, but I assume it collects the rainwater.
Actually, yeah.
And
Yeah, you just got all your gutters and stuff that feed to the basement.
in the
what
basement.
we're facing right now is a critical water shortage across a decent, I think it may be like 30% of the United States. It's a large percentage, but because we are stuck in all these kind of forward-thinking ways, and the people are getting upset because they can't just turn on their faucet and get water, and they can't just water their lawns. But we're really not thinking outside of the very traditional drill a well or reservoir building. We're there's a lot of debate over desalination of ocean water and just so many other means to bring in clean drinking
Well,
water.
desal's a great idea. The problem is that it's super energy intensive.
What I actually wasn't aware of the energy involved in doing that. What I had heard was then you end up with this surplus of salt, which to me
That's
didn't
not
sound
the issue. The
didn't sound
problem
like an
is
issue
that
to me at all.
making a
Exactly.
desal plant, like we have the technology to do it. The problem is that with the amount of energy that has to be put into desalinate the water, like the cost per gallon is just super high.
Well, we can talk about desalination another episode because that's actually, I imagine maybe they're boiling the. I don't know. We'll get into that later. Let me just. I want to finish this so we can talk about boats and RVs and vans because that actually sounds really cool. So once the structure is built, you're going to decide how you want power and water, and you can also be completely free of electricity. Some people get heat by fire and light by candlelight, but water supply is crucial. You could dig a well, collect rainwater, boil water from a nearby supply, but incoming fresh water is important, and it's and not just the incoming fresh water, but very easily overlooked is how to dispose of wastewater and sewage. An outhouse may be a solution for some, but in cold environments, it may be unpalatable, and you may find yourself, in a position where you're in below freezing temperatures and inclement weather, and you got to be using an outhouse.
Yeah, you don't want your
That-
butt frozen, like literally frozen to the toilet seat.
yeah, that's not something you want to be in. And it's also, it's not safe. So we'll talk on food planning in a minute on how that can be dangerous. But I'll start with just general food planning. Food planning can be very complicated if you're not shopping in a grocery store. Some people off the grid do make regular shopping trips, but most people, their goal is to learn how to grow, harvest, and store the food. And they have to have a basic understanding of gardening and farming, and then long-term sustainability of that. So preserving food through the wintertime, how to care for crops, when to plant, what to plant. What's the word I'm looking for about keeping your watering the plants, basically.
Irrigation.
Irrigation systems. But and on top of that, planning for the fluctuation in the weather and the general output, the yield of what you're trying to grow and harvest. And then you may end up having to be at the grocery store. And if you hadn't planned for that financially, that could be a problem. Hunting and fishing are options for people who live in a place where there's abundant wildlife, where they're near a local source where there are fish. But then also storage and preservation of these foods can be very difficult without much skill. You just talked about, Bruno, how they used to not harvest. They used to keep the meat at the end of the fall time to last through the winter time, right?
Yeah, but most of the we have to realize too that the refrigeration is something that we are using for the last 50 years,
If that in
if that in some places.
Yeah.
So 50 years ago, it started to really come into the market. Before that, it was just the salt or sugar to preserve things.
Yeah.
So I mean, bacon it's an obsolete type preservation method.
Yeah, bacon is just preservation type. The preservation
Something
type that's used for bacon is only basically used for bacon and maybe one or two other things right
Yeah,
now.
no, that was basically a salt-based preservation thing. That once that the refrigeration didn't come about, is not needed anymore. So
Let-
we just do the bacon because we sell it the flavor of it. But that would be easier to actually do it again, not on a commercial or industrial base as we do it. But
but
that's
it's still relatively easy to
easy
do.
to do. I
So
mean, most
so
of
let's
Okay,
let's
let's
talk. Let me just talk. I want to just talk real quick about storing food, and then we can hit the van life, and we can run a little overtime if we need to. But I want to get this in within the hour here. So hunting and fishing only work if you have abundant wildlife and a fish supply. But storing food means you need to keep it edible, potentially alive, and you also have to account for the food waste. There's byproduct that comes to keeping animal uh, foods in your home, and if you don't do it right, you can have pests and mismanagement of this waste or just the food supply can lead to contaminated food. It can lead to bugs, small animals, or possibly worse, dangerous large animals like bears. Uh, on clothing, because it's important, clothing, you got to be capable of bearing the elements, which means warm clothes in the wintertime, light clothes in the summertime. But you need to be able to survive the changing seasons, and you got to be able to keep your clothes stockpiled, dry, and clean because you probably don't have a washer and dryer. And then lastly, when it comes to living off the grid, uh, personal health, you have to have a good well-being. Living off the grid can be very lonely at times. It can be stressful at times, but it's generally more demanding in many aspects of life than a traditional lifestyle. So strong mental health, strong physical health are a must. Failing cardiovascular, respiratory, and muscular strength are the downfall of any person, especially one who is self-dependent. So you have to make sure that you have the capacity to take on this great endeavor of living off the grid if it's something that you choose to do. If it is something that you choose to do and you make this transition, there are very exciting changes ahead of you.
Yeah, you're probably
So,
not going to find too many fat people that are living off the grid.
well, it depends. Depends.
I
Uh,
don't think they're going to be fat for long.
but generally, you have a lot of work to do. So you got to think, you got to plan, you got to act smart. Um, and if you do so, you'll be much better aligned with success. So I wish everybody who wants to do this good luck and Godspeed. Now we're going to move into living off the grid, not on a set piece of land.
Yeah,
So,
either van or what some people like to do in their retirement, which is like sail the oceans in like a
what?
sailboat and just live on a sailboat for years.
So we got Bruno's got a couple of years on me. I think at least what 2 decades on me. I think at least. Uh, I think Bruno's got a bit of dream uh, to be water bound. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about van life or water bound life. I there's a time a while ago where I was I was working in real estate and I said, what if I just moved on to a boat that I could live in, get a electric supply to that boat, and I'd have heat in the wintertime. I could get some dock space off in New York City, and I could afford the boat and the dock space, and that would be about what I was paying in rent.
It's up in Washington Heights over there.
Exactly. Yeah, you know. So James, you want to lead with the nomadic lifestyle?
Yeah, so I don't know. Van life to me seems like being homeless with extra steps.
What do you mean extra steps? Fueling up the car?
It's well, yeah, you've got you're homeless, but you have a van. Um, Although I will say that like I've seen some pictures of the like vans that people have that like have been kitted out and have like a full bed in them and like really nice wood paneling and stuff. So some of these vans that people live in are actually really nice inside.
Yeah, it's a whole way of life. I've seen tiny house. There's a whole tiny house channel on TV right now. Now that those tiny houses aren't off the grid, but I also see a lot of people on these kind of do-it-yourself channels retrofitting vans to basically be self-sustaining.
Yeah, I think the whole idea behind the van lifers is just the idea of being really free because you can go anywhere and do anything and your house is right there with you.
Fair enough. Now Bruno lit up. He mentioned the living in a boat, and I think that's really exciting. But for me, I'm curious. I'd like you to paint a little better picture of this, Bruno. You lit up like it's something you spent a lot of time considering. So for me, I want to hit a point in my life where I can just kind of retire. I don't have to work. I don't have to worry about income. I can live a lifestyle where I spend as much effectively as I'm making, but I have the bank supply in the back end. And to me, I'll just be chilling out on the beach, drinking margaritas. But at a certain point, that lifestyle gets, how many margaritas can you drink a day, and how many days can you drink margaritas in a week, and then a week, a month, et cetera, et cetera. So living on a boat to me, while it's probably healthier than drinking margaritas every day, but I'm curious, when does that get old, and what does your vision of living on this boat look like?
Line, okay. I love the oceans. I traveled for many, many years. I lived in the ocean, on the side, or on islands and so on. So I love the ocean. Let's put it this way. So the sailing or living in a sailboat, sailing in particular, sailboat, is something that always intrigued me, in the sense that you have the ability to. A boat is a little house, is an apartment or a little house, more so than a van. Than
Yeah, there's more space
The right
generally.
type of boat. Yeah, the boats that I think are in your mind. But can you describe what type of boat that is? Is it a catamaran? It's more than
Well,
a speedboat.
definitely am more inclined towards catamarans. Catamarans is it's a stable platform, so you do have it's really, when you see the layout of those things, even the small ones, they are really nice. You have
And they're also stable because they have the two.
but generally, even a sailboat, a monohull, so to speak, it's also stable because the bottom has a weight, so it keeps it straight. Unless you are underway, so you are inclined according to the wind. But when you are on a harbor, when you are anchor, it's pretty stable, the boat anyway. You are not leaning left or right. So the thing is, you have a bathroom, you have the kitchen, you have your bedroom, you have storage, you have your living room inside and outside. So anything that is 36 feet and over, it's 36 to 50 feet. It's really,
That's a big boat though.
well, that's, yeah. Well, you don't want to be in a dinghy. I mean, that's pretty much what I'm looking for when you're talking about a sailboat. Anyway, I cannot see myself more than a couple of months in an RV. Example, RV is too. I don't know. It's
But you like the water. I like the water, but being out at sea for me would be quite scary. I think living close to the coast, I could understand. James, when I worked in South Carolina in Charleston, I worked in the downtown location, which is a peninsula, sea facing, effectively, and a lot of people sail into Charleston, into the port of Charleston, and dock off of the peninsula, and then rent cars to get around town. So I met a lot of people that told me that that's where they live. But they also had some pretty nice, some of them $1 million boats.
between Maine and Florida, there is an intercoastal waterway, so you don't even need to be in the ocean to travel north and south in the United States. And most of the continents anyway, they do have currents along the coast that is pretty, it's almost driving or riding a highway in a way.
All right. Well, we're going to have to kick out the live stream. We reached the end of the live stream. So for those of you that want to catch this, don't forget to subscribe. We're going to drop off of here. We'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, I'm looking at prices of catamarans right now. They're not cheap.
All right, I'm going to stop our broadcast. Hope that's all right.
But like, if you're sailing from one place to another, you're out on like the open ocean or whatever. Like, do you have, if you're sailing by yourself, like, what happens when you need to sleep?
There are ways. I mean, there are ways to stop the boat. There are ways to keep it going so that the boat is, especially nowadays, in order to sink, you really need to have to screw up big time. Most of those boats, they are unsinkable just by the way they are built. And yes, I know that this Titanic too was unsinkable, but then
Yeah, but they also tried.
Yeah. But so anyhow, there are ways that you put the boat in a certain way, and you can go to sleep. Anyhow, I mean, many people did cross the Atlantic. It's just 18 days. I mean, I saw young girls, 14, 16 years old, crossing. I mean, I saw people. I read about, actually in Jersey City one time, some people started rowing with a boat that could have been maybe 10 foot by 4 by 6 feet wide, and they were rowing across the freaking Atlantic. So those distances, and again, if you want to sail, when I was in the Caribbean, there were lots of boats coming over, and it took 18 days from to cross it. I saw people coming with little babies in hammock. I mean, little babies. I mean, like less than a year old. I said, "How the hell are you do that?" I said, "Oh, I was tired of my life, so I took my wife, my baby, and we crossed the Atlantic." I mean, oh God!
They didn't make that a lifestyle, did
but they did actually make a lifestyle. After that, they do.
An aquatic lifestyle.
Yeah, Rosh is saying that the babies can be an emergency food supply too.
Yeah, it's terrible. No, it's terrible.
So look, I got to show you. Bruno brought over this nice cheese. I got to show you just because I got to flex it. I gotta show you here in the.
Ooh, is that like I can't really see? Is that blue cheese?
No, that's a goat cheese with that is cured in ashes and then smoke.
It actually looks really, really good, and we haven't had much of an opportunity to kind of dig in over the last 40 minutes. So we may, while we're having this conversation.
They call it Humboldt Fog.
Ah.
Most likely you'll find it somewhere in one of those cheese places. It's a soft cheese with, again, it was cured under ashes and...
Do we want to wrap the live portion of this cast and go off air?
All right, fair enough. I think we'll enjoy the cheese off air. I want to thank everybody for joining us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. And we got a few things to carry off air, and we got to eat some cheese. And we don't want you guys watching us while we're digging into this cheese. So
I also need to get your thoughts on this travel stuff because I need to book my flights before.
I'm aware. All right, so I'm gonna sever the stream, and we'll talk some travel plans. We'll talk some cheese, and hopefully one of the next episodes is done live with you over here. So let me just bring us offline. We'll see you guys next time.
This is the other end of SipTalk. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making it this far, and we'll see you next time. This has been fun.
I like PBR. I just got priced out of it.